Welcome to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth, and you're listening to a weekly podcast about books and life, not necessarily in that order. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show on iTunes, or use our RSS feed with your favorite podcatcher. You can find the RSS feed on our websites, vmspod.com or chimeraobscura.com/VM. We're also on Twitter at VMSPod, on Facebook at facebook.com/virtualmemoriesshow, and on Tumblr at virtualmemoriespodcast.tumblr.com. I also just launched on Instagram as VMSPod, so check that one out. It's got pictures that are related to the show and some that are just, cute pictures of my dog, whatever. You can support this podcast and get access to exclusive content with a recurring monthly donation via Patreon. Just visit patreon.com/VMSpod and set up your level of support. Every week you'll get new material from our patron-only blog, and you'll also get to listen to my monthly bonus podcast, Fear of a Square Planet, which features extra material from our guests and is only available to supporters of the show. So visit patreon.com/VMSpod or paypal.me/VMSpod and help me to produce smart conversation about books, art, comics, and culture every week here at the Virtual Memories Show. Okay, the election. I wrote about it in last week's email for the Ed Koren episode. Short version, I woke up the next morning, thought, I'm done. And it wasn't just about the podcast, obviously. But I just thought, I am just going to disconnect from the culture, cultivate my library, do what I can at my day job, and there's just no point. Now, I also told myself the night before, do not make any major life decisions in the next 48 to 72 hours because, we're a little bit crazy right now. But I was disheartened, frankly. I just felt like, anything I'm doing culturally doesn't really matter given that, we live in this day and age, as it were. But as I wrote in that email when I was walking my dog that morning, I remembered that there are guiding principles on the chimeraobscura.com/VMS/podcast archive page for this show, which are sort of a mission statement. The main one, the very first one I posted, it has the closing quote from Italo Calvino's book, Invisible Cities. That's a book that was given to me by a senior year in high school English teacher, Joe Blake, who I've talked about on the show way, way back. Joe died just a few years later, very, very young. But he saw something in me in terms of my literary interests and gave me a book that closes with the following quote. The inferno of the living is not something that will be. If there is one, it is what is already here. The inferno where we live every day, that we form by being together. There are two ways to escape suffering it. The first is easy for many. Accept the inferno and become such a part of it that you can no longer see it. The second is risky and demands constant vigilance and apprehension. Seek and learn to recognize who and what, in the midst of inferno, are not inferno, and then make them endure. Give them space. So that was back in 1989 that Joe gave me that book to read, and it's stuck with me all these years. And that quote is, it's what I've been doing, and it's why I'm going to try to keep doing it going forward. That said, I might take next week off, frankly. I don't have anybody booked. I am traveling this week, and I was unable to come up with a guest to record with during my trip to Denver. In fact, I'm recording this on Saturday, and I'll post it. Well, I'll set it to post on Tuesday. If the plane goes down, obviously, as I've mentioned in the past, this will be my sad-ass last testament. But I don't have anyone booked, is what I'm saying. That said, it's Thanksgiving week. Maybe it's okay to take that one off, I haven't skipped a week since December 22nd of 2015, so maybe I'm due. Come back next week and you'll find out. Now, this week, we have a really fun conversation. It's with a humorist, artist, cartoonist, writer named Bob Eckstein. Bob has a new book out called, and it's one of my favorite books this year. It's called Footnotes from the World's Greatest Bookstores. It is It's by Potter Books. It is a beautiful, beautiful piece of work. It consists of paintings of 75 of the world's greatest bookstores with anecdotes about each one sort of overlaid on the paintings. And on the left side of the page is a description of the bookstore, its history, just a little bit about it, how long it's been around, if it's still around, etc. It is a book that the existence of this brings me joy. The fact that, especially right now, I can be reminded that there are these little pockets of culture and the bookstores still exist. I'll just, you're a listener of this show. You understand exactly what I'm talking about. So Bob did this wonderful book, Footnotes from the World's Greatest Bookstores. It is, I think if you know anyone who is a big reader, book aficionado, etc., get this for them for the holidays. They will be ecstatic. It might even give them a little set of targets, basically, or a list of bookstores to hit during travels. I know it's given me one. And in fact, this weekend, I'll be visiting one of the bookstores in Bob's book, The Tattered Cover in Denver. Now, there are some caveats for this one. There are very few, actually. The big one is that we recorded this on Halloween, so obviously it's pre-election. It's conceivable that every podcast I do from here on is going to have guests who are very, very depressed. We'll see, how that goes. The other big caveat, this is the second episode that I've used Adobe Audition as the editing and processing tool. Previously, I was using Audacity and Logic Pro. I've moved over to Audition. I'm still kind of figuring it out and tweaking it. That said, it seems to have a lot more tools than I had for under Logic Pro. Gives me a bit more flexibility. Also, I can output files at a lower file size without losing quality. That comes courtesy of Mark Maron's producer, Brendan McCarthy, who gave me a little bit of advice when I asked him how on earth they got such good audio quality with such small file sizes for that show. In fact, my levels are kind of low compared to Bob's on this, and I was able to find a really good workaround to fix that and improve it without having to go out of the program, edit stuff, and put it back in. None of this really interests you, I understand. But that's just how the show gets made, all the stuff that goes behind it. I mean, there might be a degree to which you guys think I just sit down and record with somebody and then just put it on the internet. It actually does take a chunk of work in the background. There's a lot of technical stuff I've had to figure out. There's a lot I don't know still. Anyway, I'm just talking here. Let's get to the conversation. Here is Bob's bio from the flap copy of Footnotes, which, I will reiterate, you really should go buy. Footnotes from the World's Greatest Bookstores. Bob does have a more extensive and humorous bio at bobeckstein.com, and I'll spell that out for you when we get to the end of the show. Bob Eckstein is an illustrator, writer, and cartoonist. His work has appeared in The New Yorker, The New York Times, and The Wall Street Journal, among many other publications. He is also known as the world's leading snowman expert and is the author of the holiday classic, The History of the Snowman. He lives in New York City. And now, the Virtual Memories conversation with Bob Eckstein. How'd the book start? But actually, first thing, thank you for making Footnotes, because there are very few books that I just sit there with this smile plastered on my face, and it was just somebody is, revering and chronicling these great bookstores, which is, the world I just pine for, where people actually care about these sort of things. So thank you for making the book first.
Oh, thank you.
How did it start?
Well, it's what is in front of you now is a lot different than what I intended. It's right now a very passionate thing for me. It's something that I'm very, very excited about, but it didn't start out that way necessarily. It was a byproduct of a story I did for the New Yorker website. Mm-hmm. They gave me an assignment, and we were bouncing around some ideas of what to do. And someone came up with, it could have been me or the editor, Michael Ager, who said, let's do something about endangered bookstores in New York City. So we did it, and I was doing some loose sketches of these bookstores throughout the city that I had known, and the piece was well received. So much so that we did a sequel. Mm-hmm. And the sequel went viral, And that afternoon that the piece was posted on the website, I got a phone call from a publisher who suggested the book. Mm-hmm. And we bounced around some ideas. We talked about what it would be like. And I said, let me try it. It seems like a good idea for me. And I get more into the bookstore scene. And then it evolved into something bigger. As I worked with the editor over at Penguin Random House, I started talking to all the people who work at bookstores, owners and employees and customers. And as I was collecting stories, it grew into something that I became really excited about. And it was just a lot of fun. I started making a wish list of who I wanted in the book. Like my favorite people who inspired me growing up or people who I had befriended. And this list of people I reached out to and asked them if they had a bookstore story. And that was a lot of fun. It included people who also I didn't know. I mean, I even put in people like that I thought I'd have no chance of getting, like President Obama. And it turned out that I actually had a friend of a friend who was able to make a contact, and we almost had him in the book. But we did get a lot of other fun people in the book, including stories about David Bowie and Robin Williams. Michael Palin's in the book, Terry Gross, Mark Maron. So it's a really good collection. Turns out that I cut the book in half. The editor wanted it to be halved because it was getting too long. So we had a lot of stories to choose from, and we had like 300 stories. And I did take out a lot of celebrity stories because it became almost a thing where I was afraid people thought I was putting people in the book because they were famous. Yeah. I mean, but the book does have three things I love, which is painting and bookstores and name dropping. So I had a chance to throw in all those people who I really admire.
Mm-hmm. Without going too overboard with it, which is nice, because you do leaven it with stories of booksellers nobody knows by name. You know, you balance it out nicely.
Yeah, I want to make sure, too, that the reader didn't have fatigue.
Yeah.
So I try to mix it up. Because initially I got like some repeat stories over and over. Everyone thought that their story of groping a stranger who they thought was their wife in the back of a bookstore is like this amazing story. And also, I deserve some certificate of merit for listening patiently to all these owners on the phone talk to me about their bookstore cat. Everyone thought that cat was like the most wonderful cat.
Nobody's ever had this but me. That's...
Yeah. So, yeah, at the end, we didn't have any cat stories. We agreed that we had to take out the 200 cat stories that we had collected. But just to make peace of mind and have some closure, I did an illustration of a cat for the end of the book that says Employee of the Month, just so people wouldn't be sending us angry letters.
Now, some of the bookstores you visited, other ones you operated from photo reference?
A lot of them I had photos sent to me. Mm-hmm. Some of them I sent people to. I had a group of people helping me, world travelers who are in the publishing business, because some of them actually gave me the tip. Like, for instance, there's this one store in India by the Taj Mahal that I would have not known about, but she's like this, worldwide traveler, and she helped me with that. But for the most part, I did try to go to the stores. I do plan to try to go to a lot of these stores. It would have been logistically impossible to go to every one. Sure. There was just too many, but I did go to a lot more than people would imagine. And I did photograph some myself or even sketch some in person. There was some that I went to and I would do a little bit of this, a little bit of that. And I try not to use too much reference or let reference be too much a thing, because I found that the more I used my imagination, the looser the work came out and the more vibrant and sexy the bookstores became, because I was ad-libbing. I would take even the photographs I had for stores I didn't visit. I would take things out and I would try to romanticize the actual look of the store. And I would also use many photos or many accounts of what the store was like to the owners. And in some cases, I would do the store a couple of times. Like, for instance, there was this one barge in London that's a bookstore. And that one I did like 4 or 5 times before I felt like I really captured it. I actually then went to the store and did it again. I was inside the book barge. It was a beautiful little space that converts into a living quarters at nighttime. But that's a case of where it sort of evolved. I kind of went to the place, and then I got a better feel for what the store really should be like. I mean, initially, this wasn't meant even to be like that, where I was going to make the artwork the forefront. When I was about halfway through the book, the publisher had a meeting with me, and they said, we're going to make some changes. We'd like you to know that we're thinking about doing it this way. So it's more of an art book. We want to know if you think it's okay. And I wasn't okay with it. I said, well, I thought we were going to make this the focus of the stories, and that my artwork in the background would be loose and be like background music. Mm-hmm. Not that it would be like sort of the focus of the book, and I really didn't think it should be. But they said, no, people are going to get excited about the artwork, they think, and the way you're interpreting the way the stories are, and that should be more of a focal point. And they kind of convinced me of that. And it was a big turning point to the book and the way I felt about bookstores. All of a sudden, I felt it was my responsibility now to give my interpretation and to really, try to make the stores all look their best.
Yeah.
I was spending more time on the artwork. I was getting more excited about what I saw in front of me even. I was actually surprising myself a little bit that I could do the work in a certain way. It was getting more colorful, and it just sort of grew. By the time I finished the book, I thought that I did my best work, and I was really sorry it ended. I was ready to do more, and hopefully I will, because when we cut that, when I told you I'd have the book, that meant I had like 75 bookstores I left out. And I actually had to tell these bookstores that they didn't make the cut. And I felt bad.
Yeah,
and so,
I can imagine.
So I would love to sort of like, just for peace of mind, and feel like, I just want to make everyone not, feel like I left them out. I feel like every bookstore in the book now is good and deserves to be in the book. But there's so many great stores I left out.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think Drew Friedman did 3 volumes of old Jewish comedians. Yeah, he's even got a new Heroes of the Comics collection over here. So there's room to have a sequel, I guess. What was the furthest you traveled for the book?
That's a tough one. Let me think about this. Well, it was Iceland. I was in Iceland. I was in Europe, but I didn't go to Eastern Europe. And, unfortunately, I didn't go to Africa or Australia, but those are places I want to go in the sequel. If there is a sequel, which looks like there's a good chance it could be, because the book is doing okay. And
I'm going to buy a dozen copies for friends for the holidays. So
that does it then.
That'll push you over the top.
Let me make some phone calls, because unfortunately, I didn't go to India and Africa, and I know of places that were good for the book. Again, the bookstore book began a very modest project, so it didn't justify me traveling around the world.
Then we're going to put a budget together to set on a world tour.
Right. I had traveled around the world for my other book, for the Snowman book, to do research. And when I did that book, the expenses were very high. I mean, I spent 7 years doing research, and so I was a little bit gun shy. Yeah. And now that I see that the book has a place for people who really, love bookstores, that this is something that really is something more than, it began. It just as a website piece, now it's grown into a book. Now I'm going to go, feet first and just dive into all these different places. And so I'm sorry I say I can't think of any more exotic places than just Western Europe.
No, but I'd wondered if you'd, traveled. It seemed like the India and China ones were inaccessible in that respect.
Yeah, I did have people go there.
Yeah.
So that was nice.
What was your childhood bookstore? And it's okay to say like Walden Books or B. Dalton or something, because that was me. So,
well, I would say Strand, as a teenager, was my first, my first sexual experience. There's these back rows, they're dark and stuff, and I would say, I had no place to go as a teenager, with a girlfriend, and Strand Bookstore holds a very special place for me.
That didn't make it into the book. That's
There was like 3 sex stories that we had for the book that we took out. We actually kept one in. One was from Mark Maron, who was very sweet to allow me to interview him, because he was just preparing to interview President Obama. and I was explaining that I was trying to get him as well in the book, President Obama, that it is. And I was talking to Mark. He's very nice. Everyone warned me he was going to be difficult, but he was actually very sweet. And he was telling me the story about learning about sex in a bookstore. He was going through Robert Crumb books.
Yeah.
And we finished up, and I was thinking to myself when he was finishing, I said, well, this story is a little bit crass, but, it's Mark Maron, and the way he says it's really nice. And I'm saying thank you and, blah, blah, blah. And he goes, well, I'm just happy to help because bookstores meant so much to me. It was actually a bookstore that saved my life. So I said, whoa, hold on.
Okay. That story.
Yeah, what's that story? And he gave me this amazing story. It was really great. And actually from that, he convinced me to contact Terry Gross. And Terry Gross, I wound up contacting, and we've actually become friends. I mean, we chat every so often and stuff, which is really neat. It's a little side project. A byproduct of the Mark Maron interview. And I'll tell you a really quick story about Terry Gross. Autocorrect is always trying to destroy my career. And at one point early on in our friendship, I had sent her an email that said, Terry, thanks a lot. I really appreciate this because I know how busty you are. Autocorrect sent it off that way. And I actually had to follow up with an apology, and thank goodness she has a great sense of humor.
Yeah.
But
it doesn't have giant boobs, so
But I did have to make it up to her by promising her that I would get her into the New Yorker in a cartoon, which I made happen through my friend Michael Shaw, who's really brilliant cartoonist. And I had convinced him, let's try to get Terry Gross into a cartoon. It would be a really good idea.
Yeah.
And he came through with a really good one.
Nice. Did you consider yourself a literary pilgrim at all? Did you hunt down authors' former homes or where they died or anything like that? Was that ever a thing for you?
People gave me that as a story sometimes for the book, but it wasn't something that was necessarily that was a bent of mine.
Yes, I wonder, regardless of the book,
that's because I guess I'm thinking more visually. So it's not something that I thought. I did go to Zen Gray's old home and things like that. But I just kind of learned a lot too. I mean, I have to admit, there was a lot of areas in literature that I'm not very familiar with. So I kind of expanded my. Oh,
I haven't read all these. Don't operate under any assumption that I'm super smart with this stuff. We're sitting in my library right now. we record, by the way. So, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, my wife is like this too. I mean, she's got about 1,500 books. And she'll buy them just because they're beautiful to put down on the coffee table. But we don't have 1,500 coffee tables.
The things pile up. But,
yeah.
But you tell me about your history, though, both within within art, within cartooning, and within literature. How did you get started?
Wow.
We're talking childhood. You can talk about
right.
artistic leanings from being a kid.
Well, I mean, I have to say I didn't have an environment to nurture this necessarily. I grew up in the South Bronx. My dad was a bus driver, and my only exposure to artwork back then was that as a grade school kid, an altar boy at Holy Cross, I would read Sports Illustrated. And Sports Illustrated was really my introduction to artwork by Walt Spitzmiller, Bernie Fuchs, Bert Farbs was another one. And then
to get some Jack Davis in there every so often, but
not
even after your childhood.
That was actually more into the actual painting and illustration. That was straightforward, but I mean, it came back around because when it came time to do this book, I revisited those people I was first exposed to, and two people in particular are Robert Weaver and Robert Cunningham. Both are really distinguished illustrators who I would take clippings of their work and place it around my workspace when I was doing these bookstores. Interesting about these two fellows that they both were losing their sight, and their work was very blunt and very impressionistic. It was very, very loose, and I tried to capture that myself. And I found myself working where I was squinting a lot and trying to have that feel where it was just not reliant, again, on the photographs, but just on mood and feeling, a lot of color. And I didn't always capture that goal in these bookstores, but I tried. But that was my first exposure, and I had dreamt of trying to be in Sports Illustrated growing up. I think that's the first time I thought to myself, I would really like to do artwork. And as a kid, it was sports. You know, you watch football and baseball as an eight-year-old. That's what seems exciting.
Yeah.
And that's what drew me into it. And down the road, I actually did work for Sports Illustrated briefly until the point that they stopped using illustration, which is really unfortunate. I can remember the last job I did for them was a cover job that never ran. They gave me a kill fee. But back then, doing a cover job was big. It was a good payday. And I had designed an emblem, a logo, and a uniform for an expansion team. And Mickey Mantle died the night before and bumped me off the cover.
Lousy son of a bitch.
Again, Mickey Mantle comes back to haunt me. Yes, and that was it. I mean, I don't think they've run an illustration on their covers since that time.
Photography, yeah. How did you get from the childhood love of this
stuff? I just left you there with the Mick. Sorry.
No, it's okay. That's people, people have their stories, and then there's what I want to find out. But how did you end up pursuing art?
So I started going to art classes in high school and stuff, and I thought that this was something I definitely was getting more and more into, and something that I was trying to look into is what could I do? Could I do something for magazines and stuff? And I started sneaking into college classes. I would come into the city from Long Island. By that time, we were no longer living in the Bronx, but I was living in Long Island. That's where I went to junior high and high school. And I knew I couldn't get into college. It was going to be too much money for us. So I took up tennis. I had a friend of mine who taught me how to play tennis in, I guess, my sophomore year. And I started playing all the time, practicing and stuff, which turned out to be a great idea because I wound up getting tennis scholarships. I was able to go to school.
Okay.
And my high school teachers, for the most part, some of them were supportive. A couple of them couldn't believe that I was interested in art, even though I was taking their class. Mm-hmm. And I stopped going to high school. I didn't go my senior year, but I did accept applications to go to college. I had tennis scholarships from a few places, and I got a scholarship from Pratt. So I went to Pratt. I did go to Cooper Union for 18 minutes. I was there in a room filled with people who no one else spoke English. It was all these brilliant artists from Europe, students who were culled from, the big pool over there. And it was gloomy, and it wasn't my thing. And at that time, I started leaning toward comedy. I started trying to do things that were humorous, and so my leaning was not serious. Yeah. I didn't want to be a fine artist. I wanted to be some kind of humorous illustrator. And you mentioned Jack Davis. Of course, he would be an example of someone who I was inspired by. Although I was inspired by a zillion things, Charles Schultz, Charles Adams, Charles Grogan, it just
all the Charles.
Yeah, everything was an inspiration. Hundreds of episodes of The Odd Couple, thousands of things my grandma said. Just anything. And it's hard to pinpoint. I was thinking.
Were you the funny kid?
No. I was not class clown. But I did pick things out. I did try to see how things worked, to be funny, timing and stuff. I remember, like you say, what's your inspiration? I've heard before. And it's such a big question. I remember in 8th grade, there was a social studies teacher, Mr. Reardon. And he was this guy who was just an unassuming teacher, but he was very unorthodox in his teaching method, and he was very funny. And he used to dress like the janitor. He looked like the janitor. Before that year, he was the school janitor. He
just moved up to
right.
Teacher.
He was our janitor, and then he was our teacher. And he was one of these guys who used to lean back in these big leather chairs. He was always chewing on a pen or something. I remember this distinctively. And he would lean back to the blackboard. And I remember the last week of our class, he said, for our final grade, we're going to have one question. We haven't had quizzes or any type of paperwork that we did where we had grades. And all of a sudden he said, this is our final grade. Explain the history of the world. And that was it. You have all week to do this. And the same thing when I was asked at a recent interview was like, what's your inspiration? It's like, it's hard to pinpoint. I mean, where do you begin? Because it's like everything I overheard at a party or on a subway, and anything could be turned into a cartoon or something like that. But, or it could be any person. Marvin Gonzalez. Marvin Gonzalez sat next to me in that class, and he was a stoner. And I remember when we had this assignment, described in an essay the history of the world. And we were all given these blank pieces of paper, and the rest of the class was like in stunned silence. And Marvin, he's this real hipster cool guy, and he just started scribbling something on a piece of paper. And Mr. Reedon's leaning against the blackboard. And Marvin gets up 2 minutes later. We started this. He walks up and just drops and floats down his essay onto Mr. Reedon's paper. He takes his denim jacket and just leaves the room. And about 60 seconds pass, and Mr. Reedon just abruptly leans forward. This big jarring screeching of the chair, and he picks up the piece of paper, and he holds it up. And the rest of the class, we all stop, and we're waiting to see what happens. And then he reads out, John Kennedy shot Abraham Lincoln. The end. So Mr. Reedon drops the paper down. He leans back in his chair and goes back to chewing his pen. And I remember this story distinctively, saying to myself, okay, this is a lesson in timing, in comic timing. You can't make this up. This is like perfect time. I never saw Marvin Gonzalez again the rest of my life.
Yeah.
He left.
But he's emblazoned there. And
yeah, he didn't return. But you don't know where your lessons could come from.
Yeah.
I mean, so it's not necessarily like people... I hear people tell me, so who's your influence and this and that, but it could come from the person at the supermarket. Mm-hmm. It could come from anywhere. It could come from Marvin Gonzalez.
Yeah. Were there cartoonists you either emulated or at least looked at as, wow, this is the sort of cartooning I want to do?
There was one guy, there was a couple of people who, growing up, I was really big fans of, and I kind of really became their student without them knowing. And I'm proud to say that they both became friends. One is Michael Maslin and one is Nick Downs. Nick Downs was in the National Lampoon, who was working for Sam Gross. Mm-hmm. And Sam Gross was someone else who I collected his paperbacks. And I wound up knowing Sam Gross because when I was doing my first book, the Snowman book, which is the history of the snowman, I decided I didn't want to bore people. I was afraid of being boring. So I put an intermission in the middle. It's going to be a collection of the best New Yorker cartoons about snowmen. And I came across the Snowman cartoon by Sam Gross. And I had to negotiate with him and talk to him on the phone, and we got to talking, and it was really nice. And we became friends. And at some point, he invited me to a New Yorker lunch for my birthday. And it was there that I got a chance to meet him in person for the first time. I think it was that we sat down face to face. And I had a good time, and I said, well, can I come back? I mean, this is kind of neat and stuff. You do this thing in the restaurants every Tuesday, and I met some other people who I like A.M. Wilson, and Mort Goldberg was there. And I said, would you mind if I just came back? And he goes, no, you could come back. But when you come back, bring 10 sketches. And I said, well, you know what? He goes, no, why don't you try doing a New Yorker cartoon? I had done cartoons here and there once in a while. Like for Spy Magazine, I had done some when they said, oh, we have an empty space. Could you think of something? And at that time, I was writing for them and doing charts, but I wasn't doing cartoons. And I really didn't think of cartoons a whole lot. I mean, again, I was fans with guys like Michael Maslin and other people like that, but I wasn't really into it. I wasn't doing gag cartoons. But anyway, so I decided, well, I'll give it a try. And I couldn't do it. It was too hard. But 2 weeks later, I did come back with 10 sketches. And Sam went ahead of me at Bob Mankoff's office. He dragged me into the office and said, we have this new guy and want to take a look at his work. And I went in there, and Bob actually liked the cartoons. And he bought the first cartoon, actually, that I had drawn. And at that time, I didn't appreciate it because I assumed that everybody who showed up was selling a bunch of cartoons.
Yeah.
There's like a dozen people. So I figured, well, they all sold a bunch of cartoons. And I'm the one who's new, so
I only bought one.
Yeah, so I did the worst. And I learned later more about the New Yorker, how competitive it was and stuff like that. And then...
Well, Ed Koren told the story of selling his first one, thinking, I got it made, and not selling another one for 2 years.
That's what happened to me. I learned it was beginner's luck. I had waited a year before I sold my second cartoon. And I was going in each week, and I was saying to myself, whoa, well, hold on, what's going on?
Yeah.
And then I was learning, that it was just all a fluke. I was succeeding on other fronts. I began submitting cartoons to Barron's and Harvard Business Review and other places, and they were buying my cartoon right off the bat too, in groups actually. And I was this is 2007, so it's a really late start. But at that time, I did get nominated a couple of times, like a couple of years in a row. It was Gag Cartoonist of the Year. So I thought I was doing okay. Mm-hmm. Who knew that was going to be the peak? I had no idea. But in that time, I started meeting people, and coming back around, I became friends with Michael Maslin, and I became friends with Nick Downs. Nick Downs I'll meet maybe once every 2 or 3 weeks in Chinatown with a bunch of other cartoonists who I consider the funniest people. I mean, I'm very fortunate to know, I think, the funniest people in the world. I mean, literally. I mean, people like Larry Miller, the comedian's giving me stand-up. He does stand-up. He's giving me some feedback. And, I get feedback from Michael Palin from Monty Python and people like that who I've grown to know and meet for different various paths. As a matter of fact, I had a writer friend, Len Belzer, was a writing partner with me. And unfortunately, he passed away. A couple of years ago, he committed suicide. And he was the host of the National Public Radio Comedy Hour. His brother is Richard Belzer, who I also know. And through him, I would meet different people, Yeah. They knew Robin Williams. As a matter of fact, Robin Williams committed suicide days after Len committed suicide because Richard and Robin are close friends. I had done a cartoon of one of Robin's jokes, actually, right before then. And Len, I think, gave Robin the courage to follow through with his desire to commit suicide. There was definitely a connection because they had spoken right before then, I believe. And so, unfortunately, I'm putting this podcast to a halt.
I was going to say, let's find the comedy.
Yeah, thanks for that. Can I just have a minute to cry?
But as far as name dropping goes,
I'm doing an excellent job. Yeah.
But actually, it's something I wonder about the difference between the prose comedy and the gag comedy, the gag panels. Like, there's different types of funny. How did you?
Well, I learned that the cartoons is pretty tough because, when you tell a joke on stage, if someone else tells it on stage and stuff, you can get away with a lot more. But a cartoon, I think the bar is a little higher. That's not to say there's not bad cartoons out there, but to make a cartoon really good, I think it has to work in a couple of ways. And it's definitely tougher. I think that writing a joke for a cartoon could take a long time. You could let a cartoon sit and marinate for a year before you kind of get it just right. Mm-hmm. It's not the same, I don't think, when you're writing a monologue. Yeah.
And again, did you have to learn that as you were, again, writing prose or working
on
charts
now.
And graphics? Yeah.
I'm learning every time I speak with one of my colleagues. And it's what keeps me interested in this field is that there's always something else to learn. On the way here, I was listening to a podcast with, I was listening to a Mark Maron interview the French Jerry Seinfeld, who I'm really getting into. And I'm always listening to what other people's processes.
Yeah. I mean, for Sam Gross, the guy who brought you into this, he talks pretty explicitly about his Tuesdays and his Wednesdays where he, lies back and thinks of the ideas and then sits down doing his roughs and he's got his timing. What's your process like for that?
My process is mostly that I'm just always listening. I'm always trying to overhear something that sounds like it could be a possibility, something I misheard or something I see. My process is I write everything down. I have this long list. It's a list of all the cartoons I've done. It indicates where if I sold a cartoon or if I'm still working on it. It's a list of about 1,200 ideas. And as an idea gets closer to being finished, it goes to the top of the list. It's like the Billboard 100, except there's no hits. And as I get closer to the top, by the end of the week, whichever is the top 10 ideas I have there, I draw them out. But I would say the ideas come first, the writing comes first, and the drawing always comes second, unless there's no caption. And that's just me trying to come up with some kind of visual pun that often has a caption, but then I try to find a way to execute it that I can take away the caption. Because I'm always trying to take away things, whether it's making the caption shorter or taking elements out of the drawing so that it's simplified. It's more economic for the person who's reading it. It's something that you could see quicker, because everything you add to the drawing, it could be a distraction, and it just takes away from the punch. That's actually something that was being discussed on the way here on the podcast, which is this French comedian was saying that he's got to learn that to get to point A to B faster. That's what Americans want is, they want the punchline fast, but they also want it to be short and sweet. And everything else becomes miscellaneous baggage.
Would you say that's what you've gotten best at? Would you say that's where you've improved the most in cartooning? You can always say you haven't improved in the slightest. I expect that, but
No, I've improved greatly. I'm right where I want to be.
Yeah.
No, I don't know. It's because I'm so close to it. It's hard for me to judge whether I've improved on the writing or the drawing better, but you can see that the drawing has improved. I mean, the first cartoon I did for the New Yorker doesn't look anything like I do now. Mm-hmm. So, and that just comes from repetition of just doing hundreds of cartoons and getting more familiar with the materials and being confident. I mean, a lot has to do with confidence. You feel like you could do something that's a flair, and you could do something that's very, very much away from what it looks like as a photograph. I will say that there's cartoonists now who have overwrought drawings. The drawings are too illustrative, and they can be great for children's books or textbooks, but cartooning is different. Cartooning has to be economical, and it has to feel, you have to draw funny, as Sam always tries to tell me. And I have learned that from Sam's books and all his work. And I was fortunate enough to spend a day or two with Sam in his studio working and watching him. Everything he does is just by instinct, and it's just loose, and everything is just only include what you have to include, and everything else is not necessary.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was during the Maslin conversation I had a couple of weeks ago, where he praised a Sam Gross cartoon that had run that week in the New Yorker, and he was just like, it might be one of the best things he's ever done. Like, he's still getting better and better in his mid-80s. It was the
balloon.
Yeah, the clown walks into his apartment and sees a balloon cat clawing up the chair. He just said the drawing, the timing, everything is just absolutely perfect.
Well, the thing with me is, I see some of Sam's batches almost each week. Nick Downs' batches, Michael Shaw, who's very good cartoonist. Mm-hmm. And there's a handful of other people whose cartoons are not getting published, but I see them. So I see some of the best work, and it's some really great ideas. And I'm very fortunate. So I'm getting an ongoing class. Yeah, I'm exposed to some really great lessons, and I do my best to pick up on it.
At what point did you take up cartooning? Like, how old were you when you started working in that mode?
Well, I wasn't doing gag cartooning really until 2007. Before that, I had entered one of the caption contest things. That was my only brush with the New Yorker. At that time, there was only once a year. They would do a cartoon contest in the back just once. Yeah. There was a Danny Shanahan cartoon who I later became a fan of. And I was runner-up. And at that time, I didn't think anything of it, and that was it. But before that, I was doing drawing for magazines. It was just illustration stuff. I wasn't doing cartoons.
Mm-hmm. But you did have the the illustration, the art side.
Yeah, I went to art
Ongoing
school at
almost.
Pratt. I was a photo major, and I quickly found out that I couldn't keep up with the people there. I was there to take a few things. I also took animation, which I learned was just way too much work. They tell you all the stuff you had to do. And this is before computers because, you had to draw every cell and you had to sit there and photograph each cell. So forget about that. And then I found myself doing illustration for the Village Voice and Newsday, where I was going in and I wasn't getting paid a whole lot. So I said to them, I said, I like comedy. Could I do a column? I can illustrate the column and I'll do the writing. And I did that for about 10 or 15 years where I was doing writing, where I would insist that I had to do the illustration. As a student, I had a couple of pieces at the New York Times, and that was another place where I would do writing and the illustration. But I wasn't thinking of doing cartoons. And not only that, I was not into the alternate comic underground scene, and Art Spiegelman came much later, and other people like that. I had to go back and hurry up and buy all Linda Barry's books and start catching up. I mean, when 2007, when Sam took me out to that lunch, that year I went out and bought lots of books and just tried to absorb everything I can learn about the New Yorker and really learn the proper way of doing it. So I'm a latecomer.
Yeah, but, you're making up for lost time. That's how you should look at it.
And it's my wife's. I give my wife the credit. I had met her in art school. We were enemies in school. There were times where we were in the classroom where she had left the room crying because the teacher had said something about our work, comparing it together. And we were constantly pitted against each other. And she didn't like me at all. And I'd grown to not like her because she didn't like me. And everyone knew that. And we did share some friends, and everyone knew to keep us apart. And, 12 years later, we met again at a funeral. We wound up sitting next to each other.
So it was upbeat.
Oh, yeah. Well, funerals are meat markets. That's where you meet people. And we got together again. And this time we got on a little bit better. And shortly after that, we eloped to Iceland. And so...
Did either of you have a history with Iceland, or was it just a...
I was obsessed with snow. Growing up, I've collected journals, weather journals, and stuff like that. And I was always into Ernest Shackleton and everything like that. So I always had an obsession with the cold. So we got married at the coldest place we could. Spitsbergen was like impossible. We couldn't get like the legal documents. So we went to the capital of Iceland. And then we went around the circumference and honeymooned along the coast. But when I was with my wife, she kind of set my goals much higher. Before that, I had spent too much time hanging out with friends and like trying to meet women and going out. And it's just, my goals and priorities were just off.
I'm sort of envisioning the Gilbert Gottfried showing up at Drew Friedman's house to watch monster movies at weird hours, just bringing videotapes over, and Drew's girlfriend, then wife, saying, it's him again,
hundreds of hours wasted. Yeah. I just never thought that I should do a book and stuff. But she changed my whole, set of priorities. When I had met her at the funeral, we were both asked to do a memorial show of our friend who tragically passed away.
Not a suicide, I hope.
No.
Oh, good.
But this wasn't good either, though. And she passed away suddenly, and we were going to do her tombstone in an art show. And I quickly learned more about Tammy, and that she at night would go in a van with another person and do a Meals on Wheels. And she would be going back to some of the old neighborhoods I grew up. Mm-hmm. It really worried me, even though I didn't know her a whole lot. I hadn't seen her in 12 years. Just knowing what neighborhood she was going to was a little bit scary. So I went with her a couple of times just to tag along under the pretense I cared, to give out sandwiches. I was a creepy guy then. I was not that thoughtful. This is something I would come later because I would see her. But at that point, I was just going because I was a little worried. And at one time, she was going by herself. It would be late at night, and she would be going under the bridges to deliver food, and it just blew my mind. I said, this is it. This is something. And try to clear the decks. I got rid of my girlfriend, and I asked Tammy out because I was just so moved by this person. And she changed the way I looked at art, too. She was very devoted to it. And her drive for her own artwork is something I inherited. I started seeing myself as being this layabout. I started reapproaching the way I did all my work. I started thinking about, well, what am I doing? What am my path? And she insisted I could do a book. I should think about doing something with the book so it becomes like a movie and think bigger, think grander. And since then, I've been trying to do those things. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But something like trying to get into the New Yorker is something I would never have thought of. I would have said, oh, then that's something for other people. That's not for someone like myself. I'm just some hacky illustrator.
I like to say some schlub from New Jersey.
Yeah.
Now, did your wife express disappointment when you said, "I've got it, honey, the history of the snowman"? Was that a wow, really? Or did she, support you in that too?
She loved it.
Oh, good. Okay.
She's just so, faithful to my ideas and stuff. So when I do things, she says, look, if it sounds like something you should pursue. You should look into it. At the time, I was into mysteries, and I said I would like to do a crime mystery or something. And I don't want to do crime, but I want to solve a mystery. So maybe it should be something like who told the first joke? I like comedy. Or who made the first sandwich? I like sandwiches, But then I thought, there's no books for non-denominational people during the holidays. I was going through the bookstore trying to see what hasn't been done yet. And I thought, well, there's really no book for, what about people who are not Catholic? I'm Catholic and I celebrate Christmas, but what about it for everyone else? So why don't we try to do the mystery? Who made the first snowman? So I looked into that, and quickly I found out that there was a lot of stuff out there that no one's ever expressed. That snowman making was an early form of pornography and political commentary in the Middle Ages, and that there was these stories that existed, like that the first illustrated snowman could be found in the margins of an illuminated manuscript from 1380. And the story behind that is really shocking and amazing. And so there it was. It was like I found a missing lottery ticket, and I dove into doing the book. And I would have done it like a pamphlet or a magazine article, but my wife said, no, I believe in this. I believe in you. You could do what you want. And carte blanche, go to Europe, go to Asia if you have to, go everywhere, meet with art historians, meet with the top professors of culture. We hired translators. Scholars from Columbia University were hired to translate old diaries from the Middle Ages to look for any type of evidence of snowman making in diaries. I went to the Royal Library at The Hague, and I spent days there with a magnifying glass going through all the old archives. They have a collection of 8 million images, the largest in the world. And you could narrow down your scope, your search, to a very particular little area. In my case, I asked for anything they had on winterscapes earlier than 15th century. And for days, I went through all these old prints and engravings, looking for anything that resembled a pile of snow that looked like a snowman.
A little anthropomorphic. Yeah.
Exactly. And after spending a few days, I found something, and it was a key to the puzzle of piecing together when the first snowmen were made. But that doesn't happen unless my wife tells me it's okay to do something as harebrained schemed as doing a book about who made the first snowman.
Was it difficult convincing academics and other people that you were serious in what you were pursuing?
Some were annoyed. Some were, because some didn't know the scope of it. I mean, there were some people I would say, oh, well, I'm doing something on the miracle of 1511. And they didn't know about it, and they just think it's a bogus thing. I said, well, there's some Dutch scholars who are telling me all these stories, but I need some backup sources. Or then there was the massacre of 1699 in Schenectady. And there's a scholar up there who was very upset that I explained how snowmen played a role in that massacre, which is that snowmen were made outside of Fort Schenectady. And the guards who were supposed to be there instead went inside to a pub and partied. and left the snowmen guarding the fort. And the gates had been frozen shut. I mean, frozen open. And so all these French Indians and soldiers came down from Montreal in a 3-day trek, and they attacked the fort. And it's one of the bloodiest events in early American history, so it's actually quite important. And not everyone knows about this horrible event, but I laid it out in the book, in a snowman book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, you can blame snowmen for not guarding the...
I blame snowmen for a lot of things. And when Frosty came along, he made it all like very fluff and stuff. It was a kid's thing. But before that, serious artists were making snowmen, like Michelangelo and other people. And snowman making took on a whole different thing. It was a chance for artists to make work in front of their doorstep when it snowed. It was free art supplies dropped in front of them at a time when people didn't have money, and at a time before reading glasses. So this is a way of expressing things.
And essentially, you put down the final word on the history of snowmen. Like, nobody's going to come up with a follow-up and say that Eckstein doesn't know what the hell he's talking about. I'll show him.
I am. I'm going to come up with a follow-up, hopefully. I'm hoping people are going to come up and tell me there's things that I've left out. I'm anxious to learn more. So far, I don't have much, but I would like to do a revised edition and make it more adult, so it's more, at the time it was meant to be for all audiences, but I'd like to go back and actually even do it better. Mm-hmm. And there's talk about that now.
And no movie option.
It was optioned for, it was. Yeah. At the time, it happened at a bad time. The economy was crashing, and we had all these investors and stuff who had bottomed out. And we had filming to begin in Switzerland. In Switzerland, they have the holiday to usher in spring, where they make this very flammable snowman on this big pile of wood, and then they have it stuffed with dynamite. And then they exploded in the town square. And we had Mo Rocca was going to be the star of this TV movie special. It's going to be like a Christmas holiday. And then we had switched other people, different people were involved. But, we had raised all this money. It was like close to $2 million. And what happened, though, is the economy crashed and things became very expensive. Getting the crew and everything else, things fell through. And then it was shelved. And it bounced around from place to place. There was talk at the Travel Channel. There was talk at Arts and Entertainment Channel. And so it bounced around, and it didn't quite work out. The conditions they wanted to do weren't right for me. Like, one thing was that they wanted to then make it a TV show instead. Instead of it making like a movie thing, they wanted to make a TV special. And I liked that idea, but they wanted me to do like 18 different things. They wanted 18 hours worth of material. So they wanted me to also do like Easter, like St. Patrick's Day, and all that other stuff. And I said, well, I'm not an expert in those things. I can't do that. I said, you don't get it. We need 18 hours. I said, well, it's going to be crap. I said, you don't get it.
Will it fill 18 hours?
Yeah, we need 18 hours. So I said, I don't know. I think I'm going to have to pass on this. I said, I'm going to see if I can get it done the certain way I was envisioning. Mm-hmm. And then I told the story to my agent. At that time, it was a TV agent. And they all promptly fired me.
Smacked you in the head.
Yeah, they all said, you're insane. What do you think?
Take the snowman money, you idiot.
Right. Do you understand how hard it is to get that thing off the ground, a series off the ground? And so that really cemented it. I did a really bang-up job. Yeah.
And now, sitting in a basement in New Jersey recording a podcast.
Right. Learning and just rehashing all these things.
Yeah. How did beyond the financial crash, making a living in humor and cartooning and everything else, how's that worked? How's that evolved over
I'll tell you how
time?
It worked.
Or failed to, but.
Yeah, this is how it worked. My career started off much better than it's ended up. I mean, I've done better the first year, and going forth, it's always been more and more of a struggle because I got paid the same amount of money doing pieces for the New York Times in 1982, 1983 than I'm getting paid now. I mean, I did a piece for the book review and the magazine. So it's about the same amount of money. When I did covers back then, I did about 40 covers. You get paid back in the 80s and 90s for Sports Illustrated or Time magazine. You can get paid 5 figures. Nobody pays 5 figures now. Back then, they would do like 2 or 3 covers, pay them all that type of money, and choose which one they like the best.
Yeah.
They don't have that luxury. And then I did the really smart move in 2007, going into gag cartooning. I mean,
just driving yourself to the basement as fast as possible.
I mean, I abandoned a career in the freelance illustration work, in which I was also designing magazines. I was doing redesign for different magazines like the Boston Globe sports section, Sky magazine. I worked for a bunch of women magazines like Mademoiselle, Working Women. They would bring me in to do design work and to do their redesign. And I mean, that helped me survive it.
Was that anything you had studied, or was that just something you developed a skill for over time?
Yeah, it's something kind of like just bouncing around doing different things. I mean, I did go to art school, so I had the color sense and I had the design sense, so the fundamentals were there. But the actual mechanical stuff, I kind of taught myself. I mean, as everyone else did too. Everyone would buy InDesign software.
Yeah.
And you just kind of like, work your way through it. And the playing field was more level too, because you no longer were you doing pace-ups and mechanicals, but people were learning to just do everything by computer, which had all these shortcuts.
Oh, when I started in trade magazines in the mid-'90s, that was thank God there was Quark, because if I had to do these layouts myself, the magazine would look like it was made by a serial killer. So, you know, this is the most jagged cuts and paste-ups in the world. Instead, everything was digital.
But I was always on the freelance. I never went to an office. I didn't really have an office. I mean, I never got hired on staff. It was always the Village Voice provided me medical and vacation, but I still wasn't like really officially on staff. I worked one job my whole life. I worked 3 hours at a golf course. As a teenager, I was the starter. And at that time, I was down this hill at this golf course where the clubhouse was up top of the hill. And I would have people going off, making sure they all waited a significant amount of minutes before they would drive their opening shot into the heads of the group in front of them. Right. And I would joke and make people laugh. We were all having a good time. And it took about 3 hours for this golf cart come speeding down the hill from the clubhouse. And it was the owner of the golf course saying, "I'm really sorry, but you're fired. Because we have a policy of not employing people on drugs." And
were you at the time on drugs?
I'm not. I'm not on drugs then, and just you could cut this part. I'm not on drugs now.
Occasionally.
Not at all.
Good.
And I said to myself then, I said, "This is it. I'm not going to work for people." I mean, of course, I'm a stupid teenager. You can make these broad statements. I'm going to go into pro football or basketball, whatever. But I did say to myself, I didn't want to work for other people, and I just tried everything I could to not do that. And when I learned that there was a thing about freelancing, that you could work piecemeal for magazines and stuff, that's what I went into. And when I came out of college, I had already been published in a few places, so it seemed like, all right, this is a doable thing. Not knowing that if you made a bar graph of my career, it would show that I had my best year the first year out of college. And it slowly,
Okay. Yeah, now I feel terrible, but it's a comedy, episode we're having.
Well, you told me you're paying me for this, right?
Yeah.
So
that's the biggest joke. That's
hey.
What's the next book that you're working on? Which is a terrible question. Everybody hates, but I know you've mentioned it in the past. It's on your site, at least, that you have.
No, I love this question because I'm excited about the next project. No, thank you for asking, because I'm hoping that there's going to be a sequel to the bookstore book, because I do think that this is something that's fun and people are getting into. But there's this other book I'm doing, an illustrated novel from an 1850 diary about finding Sir John Franklin. And he was missing up by Greenland. And I wrote this book already, and now I want to illustrate it. I did the first half of it, and I'd like to find a home for it. So I've been working on that. And it's a comedy, it's a mystery, it's a romance. It's for children. It has some gay erotica in it. It has everything. Try to make sure everyone has got something. And I really enjoyed that.
Something to offend everyone.
Right. And I am going to revisit the history of the snowman as a graphic novel. And this time explore some of the things that maybe I didn't the first time around. I feel like there are certain things I could do that it's a little bit more helpful explaining its place as an early form of folk art, which I might have maybe went over too fast. But I do feel like now that I've done a couple of books and stuff, and I have all these years behind me, I've learned so much that I can go back and see my errors, and I know I could do a better job. I just feel like it's, I want to make sure it's done right.
When you talk about graphic novel, do you mean, long form comic storytelling or illustrated?
No, this would not be a paneled series, but it would be sort of all handwritten and then illustrated throughout with different types of sketches and some more finished than other parts. But the regular format of something like Mouth is something that I didn't think of it that way, because this is supposed to be like someone's diary.
Sure.
Yeah.
Have you done sequential comics much, or is that something you've just never really found because if you're trying to find ways of driving your income down further, I can't recommend that highly enough.
Okay.
That's really,
I'm on board then.
Good. Long form comics.
I'm thinking
that's your next project.
That and photography, stock photography is another way.
Definitely.
I'm thinking about making music that people could just download for free too.
And voiceover. That's always good too.
Oh, really?
There's a whole industry of people just doing voiceover remotely, driving the cost down as far as humanly possible. So.
But I've done pieces where I've done a few pages where I did stuff for a ski magazine, The Village Voice, where I did a couple of pages like that. It's nice, but I'm not locked into that. I'm trying to change the format of things. And that's why the illustrated diary seems like something that hasn't been done quite like that before, in the same way that the bookstore book, we were trying to come up with a different way that it opens.
Yeah.
I give credit to my publisher for that. But we did discuss doing something that was different.
I should tell people the cover opens vertically while the book itself opens horizontally, which when you get it, because I'm probably going to send you a copy if you're a listener of the show, you'll understand and you'll see why it has to be done like that.
It's like a book in a garage door.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it too. And that gets the Marin connection where everything is done in the garage. But
I am trying to make it that people want to buy it for the tactile experience, and that's not something just to get on Kindle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was reading reviews of it on Amazon. I noticed one guy was a Kindle reader of it, trying to explain what the graphics look like and the way the book works. You've got the paintings of the bookstores, and the anecdotes are painted lettering, within it. And so I couldn't really imagine trying to read that in grayscale on a little Kindle Voyage.
And I try to avoid the Amazon reviews because I don't want to get down on myself. And there's always going to be people who are going to find things wrong with the book that are real. I mean, no book is perfect, but at the same time, I felt bad for this one reviewer, and I wanted to send him a copy, a hard copy. I really did, because there was another person who bought an ebook of it, and I actually said, okay, you know what? Just one time, let me send you the copy of the book for free, because I'm telling you, you really want to see it. It's a gift thing. It's more of a thing that it's an experience to open up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what makes for a good bookstore? From your experience making this book?
Wow. There's so many ways the bookstore is important. I mean, in some places, it's the community center. It's where everything happens on Main Street. In other places, it's just the opposite. It could be a remote place where it's in an oasis, in a jungle, like the place I found in India. That place, you'd never know it unless you were given directions. And I didn't actually go to that one in person. I sent someone who went on my behalf. And
you could say it's an emissary. That's a good term to use. You've got minions or something like that to send around the world. So.
I felt bad that I wasn't there in person, but I was in touch with the owner, who has become a little bit of a celebrity because of the book. And she's been written up yesterday in all these Indian newspapers. And I did promise her I'm going to make it out there. What makes a bookstore great is the people inside. I mean, every bookstore is really, thousands of people's dreams, either fulfilled or unfulfilled. Everyone's life project is on the shelf. Mm-hmm. And it's, when you think of it that way, it's pretty amazing. It's like the one place where everyone's there. And it's also going to be where people's dreams are going to be triggered. People are going to go in there, and a book is going to tell them they should do the same thing. they're going to put their life in a book, or they're going to put their life experiences and their skills in some way into a book form. And that's however books get made. It's the place of inspiration.
Okay. So what did you get better at with the book as it went along?
Well, I started to learn more about people in the book business, about how much they love books. I started respecting their opinion more and started realizing how much they were in, all in with their commitment to it. Because it wasn't just them selling books. What I found out, the more stories I heard, was that it was also about them getting books into people's hands. They wanted people to read. They wanted people to say they had a place to go. And in some cases, it had nothing to do with books. They wanted to say there was a place for solitude, like they were providing a place for people who wanted to find a place they could say was also theirs. Or just conversely, it was a place where they knew people could come to meet like-minded intellectual people, where they could discuss things and they could find themselves around people who also love books or certain subjects. And so as I went on with the book, I realized that the depth of the stories didn't always have to be about some husband groping a stranger in the back shelf or something like that, that there was a lot that could be found in the bookstores. I started reaching deeper to what the stories could mean.
Yeah.
And an example was the Mark Maron story. I mentioned how a bookstore changes life, and that's an example. I mean, there were some stories, there was more than one, where a person said their whole life turned in a bookstore. So to me, that was very humbling, and yeah, it made me feel like I'm doing something a little more than I had started out.
And it taught you to look a little bit deeper once you got those sort of surface stories from some people?
Oh, exactly. That's very interesting, because we're doing this right now. And that is, you and me have already spoken about different things. And now as I'm getting deeper into the subject, things are starting to come up. I mean, I came up with some stories earlier that I didn't remember. I mean, but you brought it out of me. And that's what would happen on the telephone. I would be on the phone for an hour with an old timer. And as we're saying goodbye, all of a sudden he says, "Oh, wait." And then there was the time that Johnny Cash came in. And, we'd always go from like an Uncle Al who shoplifted in a store to, oh, wait, yeah, there was the time that David Bowie helped a woman in labor. It's like you have some patience.
I forgot about that one.
Right. So there's patience, and there's times when you have to let people, let it come out and not rush people and stuff. And I do rush. I talk over myself even. And something I have to learn to just let things happen. I have to embrace silence, because in that silence, some things are happening. And with people, everyone works at a different pace and stuff. And that even means sometimes revisiting a person. There were times that I thought I had the right story. And then I would go back and say, you know what? You had time to think about it. And I know that sometimes people have regrets or whatever. And I also needed to do that to make sure people were okay with the story I was going to use.
Sure.
So I wanted to let them have a second chance. But so many times people said, after you left, months later, I was in my bed. I was staring at the ceiling at night, and I remembered blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And that's really something. I mean, we all have great stories in us somewhere.
Did you feel like a detective at all in that process? We're just sort of trying to tease something out, or, let me look at some of the clues here and see that there must be something deeper in this.
No, you're thinking of Columbo when he's like saying, well, yeah.
One more thing.
Yeah, it wasn't like that, because I put pressure on myself to do a good job. So I was just always afraid that I was dropping the ball. I was kind of hard on myself with each time saying, did I do that right? Did I get the right story? So it wasn't more like, having fun as a detective as much as I'm doing this book. I had better do a good job, because now as I'm hearing this, everyone's livelihood in life is like on the line here. I wanted to make them sound good. I wanted to help. I wanted to do a good product. So I was a little bit, if anything, nervous. Mm-hmm. I was more nervous than anything to say that I, got the best story and stuff.
I think you did a great job.
Oh, thanks.
Your favorite bookstore in the city? Currently, besides a Strand because of your obvious, history.
Boy, that's so tough because, I go through New York City bookstores in my head right now, and I'm thinking of like 18 stores.
Yeah.
So it's like whatever day you ask me that question is
And
what
the neighborhood you might be in. And, yeah.
Right. My favorite bookstore. Well, I want to say I love Barnes and Nobles. Barnes and Nobles. It's people assume that I'm going to be against a big bookstore, but Barnes and Nobles is responsible for so many good things in publishing because they pay publishing houses money for advance orders. Independent bookstores do not do that. It's the Barnes and Nobles, though, who will pay for a big order. And then in line, the publishing house can then put that money toward advances and take risk on new people. I mean, a publishing house has got, let's say, 10 books that are coming out, and one's going to be a big hit, and the other 9 are going to lose money for them. They do that knowing that one book is going to make up for it.
Yeah.
And they don't know which of those 9 books will in the future be a very good investment. But this is the way the system works. You have to put the money back in and invest, and they can't take that chance unless it was for stores like Barnes & Noble. And the Barnes & Noble in Lincoln Center is now closed. Was wonderful to me. I was in there putting up snowmen in their window display that goes around the corner. I remember going in their window display with a hot glue gun and large globes. We made snowmen out of large globes. And just want to say, Ernest Hemingway was never in a window display with a hot glue gun. It's just like, this is the way it is now. Because when you go into a bookstore, there are like thousands, there's 30,000 books on the shelves. And to get attention, it takes that type of hard work to make your book stand out. That store sold thousands of my book. I did an event there. The event was amazing. It was really great. And so they're very supportive, and they're definitely one of my favorite stores. And I also did a lot of research regarding how much the bookstores did for their community outside, and in some cases didn't let anyone know. And what I learned was that there are hospitals and rehab centers up in Westchester that have libraries for the patients, and they were fully stocked by donations by Barnes & Noble. Barnes & Noble, at this one place alone, just one place, had given like 14,000 books. And it's not something that people know about and stuff like that. I mean, people in publishing are really giving people. I mean, you don't go into publishing necessarily to be rich. It's a very hard business.
I just finished the memoir of Robert Gottlieb, the great Knopf editor, maybe not publisher, but top editor, and then a New Yorker, the guy who replaced William Shawn, which everybody has stories about. But yeah, it's one of those things where you realize it's again a different sort of occupation. And seeing how it's changed for him over 60 plus years.
Those are books I want to read next.
Yeah.
And you should tell your listeners I came here dressed as William Shaw, as my Halloween costume, which so far on the way here, no one mentioned anything. But,
unfortunately. I did bump into Wallace Shawn in a bookstore once, his son, who everybody knows from like Clueless and things like that. At St. Mark's. The third location of St. Mark's before the final location where it closed, which was also, because we all have these bookstore landmarks, the place where my wife and I met for our first date, which you did not include in the book, but I understand because other people have much better St. Mark's stories than I do. But yeah, Amy and I met online, and for our first date, I said, well, I'll meet you at St. Mark's Books, and we'll go from there to a bar or something. Wow. But yes, because...
So that's your favorite store?
Just for that reason, yeah, that was, and now it's an empty shell waiting for a Duane Reade or something.
And you never had sex in Strand?
No, not that I think about it, not even by myself. No, I didn't. Okay. So you've still got the Strand as
But I can include you in a sequel. I can include the story. We're going to have to enhance it a little bit.
Yeah, I'll make up something. But
Oh, you have to make it up. You just have to go back to another bookstore and make a fool of yourself and do something outrageous.
Yeah, I've got possibilities. There's years ahead of me to pull this off.
Okay.
What's the response been like so far? It's only been about a month or so since the book came out, but
there's been a lot of response.
I've seen good press for it, but have you been hearing from readers?
It's very rewarding. There's been a lot of maintenance. There's some people who wanted to be in the book. Yeah. There's people who want to share their story now, and I'm explaining to them that I would love to include them.
They just have to have sex in a bookstore. I'm just kidding.
Yeah. Yeah, my inbox is filled with fun stuff. I got my inbox yesterday was
Well, did you expect the level of response that you're getting?
No, absolutely not. I mean, I knew the book was going to be a safe book in the sense that I knew that there was going to be a certain amount of sales from the bookstore's support. And I figured it's not going to lose money. But I also was aware that this is a niche audience. I figured this would be a nice little thing for people who really love bookstores and stuff. And it's that. It's just that. I'll be moving on very quickly. But the book has gone to reprint, and I'm very pleased with that. And I'm hearing from different people now, and who are, I learned, are really big book lovers. I mean, people who really love books. And oh God, it's been now 5 minutes since I name dropped, but I have people I want to mention. But let's just say there are people telling me that they want to champion independent bookstores, and that's really great. There are people who do this where, these associations, the American Booksellers Association, they try to reach out to people who have a voice in everything, and these people are now coming forth and they're just speaking up for it, and that's just great because as bookstores are doing better, some bookstores aren't, and it's a very, very risky business. I mean, it's, every day I'm hearing news, as well as hearing good news. I'm also hearing from stores that saying they're having troubles. And I did hear that 3 Lives, for instance, in New York City, one of the stores in the book, they're having troubles. St. Mark's bookstore is in the book, and they closed. One of the most upsetting, there was a lot of crying during the book. One of the more upsetting stories was this one store I followed through on, Moby Dickens. And I was asking them what was up because said they were going to get back to me with some stories. And I had already done the painting, and I wanted to make sure that we had a nice story for them. And the guy came back and said, I'm so sorry. The last 3 weeks were terrible. We've been very busy. We went bankrupt. And so, unfortunately, this was way too much commonplace as I was traveling, hearing stories of, there was times when I went to a bookstore that was no longer there. Mm-hmm. It was there only 2 months ago. So as this was happening, as you can imagine, I was getting more into the book. I was getting more attached to feeling like this was something that was bigger than I thought. And I was getting very emotional about it. I got very passionate by the end. As a matter of fact, we had planned all these different promotion things, which now seem tacky. I was going to do this bookstore cat contest. Sounds like a really smart idea, right? Very classy. And instead, I'm doing op-eds about the plight of bookstores. And I've been doing that the last 2 or 3 weeks, where I really want to get the word out and just explain what people are going through who own bookstores and what we could do about it. Because I've been hearing different solutions from different people. Like, for instance, in Europe, there's restrictions, government restrictions of how much Amazon.com could price.
Discounting, yeah.
Yeah. Which is something that American bookstores have to deal with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's one of those, whenever I travel for work, France or Germany, I don't recall seeing so much in Spain when I was there last month, but yeah, it's just, especially in Germany and Frankfurt, I just walk around, it's just bookstores every corner almost. And it's, this is what happens when you can't undercut them and drive them out of business. I don't know if it leads to a more literary or more literate culture, but, at least it gives them a chance.
Right. But American bookstores are doing better than they should be because they're going the extra yard to becoming so involved with the community. And I see it. They really do. They've done well because they've made themselves a part of the people, and the people feel like the store is part of them. Yeah. In some cases, it's part of the business. There's a couple of examples in which a bookstore is a co-op. And it's just works like a food co-op, but it's also owned by people who take turns and they work the bookstore, and there's not one major owner.
Right.
And that's one example is Adobe Books in San Francisco.
Mm-hmm. I shudder to ask, and we talk about, again, trying to drive your income down further and further. At any point, were you tempted to open a bookstore?
No.
Good. I'm just making sure you didn't have that level of insanity.
No, I mean, I definitely appreciate how I have to be careful when I talk about this subject because I have not owned a store. But I try to always quantify that, say, I'm learning from all the different people, and I'm expressing what people told me on the road. And I'm going to be doing a panel in Miami. And I've already said that up front, I'm hoping to learn more.
Yeah.
I'm not going to I'm trying not to come off as an expert, but as someone who has heard different sides, and I'm excited about the subject. But now that I've heard everyone's side, I have stock photography to pursue and voiceover jobs and stuff. I thought there's a whole world of bankruptcy out there for me still.
And getting back to open mic nights, you got to.
Yeah.
Bob Eckstein, thanks so much for coming on the Virtual Memories Show.
Thanks so much.
After we finished up, Bob and I continued to shoot the breeze for a little while, and I mentioned a question that I should have asked him earlier, so we decided to turn the mics back on and record one more thing. And that's what I had wondered, the difference for you between gag illustration in particular and other types of comedy writing. When you work in prose, like you said, you have more room to go. Do you do stand-up or not? I wasn't sure.
No, but I've done some performances.
Yeah.
Like I did 8 minutes the other day, and I showed slides. But that's not stand-up because I have props. Once you have props, everything is much easier. The lights are low, and you could talk and have a distraction and stuff. But I've had to ad-lib, and I've been like the entertainment for different business meetings and stuff, where I was asked to be the entertainment for like an hour or something. And that's a long time.
Right.
But again, I'm aided by using my cartoons and stuff. But when it comes to writing a humor piece or a gag cartoon, the standards are the same again, where if I write something, whereas like a good pro will put it aside and revisit it, and the newcomers might just submit it, I've learned that you have to let it sit. And I will rewrite a piece. I will never turn something in that not been rewritten like 3 times, because I know now that you have to keep on rewriting, and that there's always something better to be found there. And sometimes you have to let it sit. And the same thing with a gag cartoon. Gag cartoons are better when I've done them like 2 months ago, and now I'm revisiting and I say, oh my God, that is not the best punchline for that joke. I mean, there's never a joke there that's a little bit better.
Is there ever an issue with resubmitting? It doesn't seem like, Bob Mankoff, for example, is going to say, I recognize that image. Like,
he has said that to
has
me.
He? Okay.
Yeah. And I feel bad when he does that. And it is laziness on my part. But it might also be that I'm not willing to break up with somebody who's like, I have. Yeah.
You're still convinced they were just having a bad day that day?
No, I have a crush on a cartoon, and I'm not willing to let it flow out to sea. Yeah. But I think there's something there. And a lot of times he's right by thinking that I should have just let it go. Mm-hmm. And then sometimes he'll even acknowledge that there was something there. And there have been times where I resubmitted something that we made a small tweak, and he bought it. Mm-hmm. As a matter of fact, there's been times where he made the tweak, and he suggested something that improves it. I mean, he is a very good cartoonist. I mean, I looked up to him, and I knew him even before he was my boss. We were ping pong partners.
Well, duh.
Yeah. Another career that just paid for gold.
Which, again, you just keep driving down lower and lower to the center of the earth with a job prospect. But
right. I have to go soon because I have to send out my resumes. I'm applying for a rodeo clown.
You should get some coal miner applications also out in
Pennsylvania. The same people on that line.
Good job. And that was Bob Eckstein. Visit Bob Eckstein to check out his work. There's writing, illustration, cartoons, history of the snowman, and more. And please pick up his new book, Footnotes from the World's Greatest Bookstores, from Potter Books. It is absolutely wonderful. It would make a great gift for any book lover in your life. His first book, The History of the Snowman, is also really damn entertaining. BobEckstein.com is BobEckstein.com. Oh, Bob also wanted me to tell you, he ended up using that explain the history of the world anecdote with Marvin Gonzalez in a New Yorker cartoon. It's the one where George Washington and Abe Lincoln are running around trying to shoot each other. Anyway, so that's his point, that you can find the humor and the comedy anywhere. After the main conversation, I asked Bob, so, who are you reading? And if you want to hear his answer to that, you'll need to become a supporter of the Virtual Memories show so you can get access to our monthly bonus podcast, Fear of a Square Planet. You can do that at patreon.com or at paypal.me/VMSpod. I've got all sorts of goals and goodies in place for supporters of the show, including that podcast, patron-only blog, series of ebooks, and more. Also, I finally got in a new load of promotional postcards for the show, and I'll be mailing those out to some of our supporters, which is one of the tiers of gifts. So go to patreon.com/VMSpod and support the art of fine conversation. Now, we did record this one at my home on Halloween, so there were no travel expenses or even coffee this time around. But still, if you want to help defray some of my ongoing costs, like web hosting, travel, equipment, etc., or even just compensate me for the time I spend doing this, then visit patreon.com/VMSpod or paypal.me/VMSpod and make a recurring or one-time donation. A special thanks go out to Paul W. Jones, Michael Janizik, Fred Kish, Jonathan Kranz, Andrew Mason, Greg Tanner, Zach Martin, Greg P. Steffen, and Ron Slate for going over and above in their support of the Virtual Memories show. We've got the full list of supporters at chimeraobscura.com/VM. Our music for this episode is Nothing's Gonna Bring Me Down by David Bayerwald, used with permission from the artist. David's got a reunion project going with his great 80s band, David and David, and you can find out more and support that at facebook.com/DavidandDavidMusic. And that's it for this week's Virtual Memories show. Thanks so much for listening. Like I said, we're in somewhat disheartening times for literary culture, but I'm going to keep doing this. I may not be doing this next week, but we'll come back with a new episode pretty soon. You'll need to check in next Tuesday and find out. Until then, you can subscribe to the Virtual Memories show and download past episodes at the iTunes store. You can also find all our episodes and get on our email list at either of our websites, vmspod.com or chimeraobscura.com/VM. You can also follow the Virtual Memories show on Twitter at VMSpod, on Facebook at facebook.com/Virtual Memories Show, and at virtualmemoriespodcast.tumblr.com. And if you like this show, please go to iTunes, look up the Virtual Memories Show, and leave a rating and review for this podcast. That'll help us build a bigger audience. Until next time, you've been listening to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth, and you are awesome. Keep it that way.